As was mentioned earlier in the opening plenary this morning, this is the first year that at the Interledger Summit we have had a parliamentarian track. We have 10 parliamentarians joining us from 8 countries throughout Africa, East, North, West, and Central Africa. And we think it's important to have parliamentarians involved in these discussions because we want them, firstly, to see the opportunities that can exist by having open, interoperable payment protocols that work. We want help in developing frameworks that will be able to support the advancement of technologies that support digital financial inclusion. And more importantly, we want to hear the perspectives of parliamentarians who represent constituencies at the local level to understand what are the challenges that their communities are facing in addressing the challenge of digital financial inclusion. So I would love to introduce 3 of the parliamentarians who are on the stage with me now. Again, we have 10. They are seated in the front row of this room. You're also welcome to engage with them in the coffee breaks as well. But on the stage to my left is the Honorable Esther Passaris, a Member of Parliament from Kenya, the Honorable Neema Lugangira, a Member of Parliament from Tanzania, and the Honorable Catherine Muma, a Senator from Kenya. Thank you everyone for joining. I have one question to start off this discussion that I'll ask all of you to respond to, and that is, in case you're not aware, many of the people in this room are more from a software engineering background. They code. They may be a little skeptical or uncertain as to the role of regulation or the importance of regulation. So maybe you could explain, just briefly, why does it matter that we have parliamentarians here? Why do we want to engage with parliamentarians? Would you like to kick me off, Senator Muma?
Thank you very much for that question, Aiden. First, to thank you to thank Interledger for thinking about bringing parliamentarians around. The reason is that parliaments form part of governance, and everything you do, private or other, is governed in any other country, in any country, by regulation and by law. And oftentimes, when you ignore the role of lawmakers and regulators, you then fall into the kind of trouble. You had the first panel just before lunch. We were told they had quite a number of expectations around regulation, and then realized this is something that is going to take a year. It's something that is going to take a very long time before there is clarity around regulation. And that then delays the good ideas that you have to roll out and so on. Now, Parliament has key responsibilities to facilitate legislation that coordinates and guides all issues in all sectors within a country, and to give the authority that facilitates regulation of all activities, whether financial, whether health, or any other. And they also have the role of oversighting, because for every product that you provide, you have consumers who have the right to be protected from harmful consequences of any product that comes to the market. So if we are to ensure that open payment and financial products that come are helpful or useful to all citizens, we have a responsibility as lawmakers to ensure that whatever product comes to the market is allowed to grow, or innovation is allowed, but at the same time, we must come up with a balance to ensure that there is regulations to protect against any violations. So, and parliamentarians do not have any inherent capacity on a lot of these issues. So your tech solutions are obvious to you as tech professionals, but they may not be as obvious. And when they're not obvious, oftentimes when there is a problem, for instance, loss of monies through these transactions, if these losses of monies become a big problem, it becomes a political problem. And it is politicians who have to address that. Now, when politicians have not been involved in the first instance to understand what's happening, on how to facilitate, on how to ensure that their laws are not obstructive, then you find that you will also be frustrated. You have a good product, but because we don't understand it as parliamentarians, we either provide law that is obstructive to what you're doing, or do not provide regulation, or because of an incident that happens as a result of no regulation, we then clamp down on something that would otherwise be good. So it is important that governance systems, whether executive and parliamentary and even the judiciary, it is important that those who are in those spaces understand what you're trying to do, understand the pros and cons of what you're trying to do, in order for them to put in place the kind of regulations that is more facilitative rather than obstructive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Neema. Honorable Lugangira, would you like to respond to the same question?
Thank you very much. As introduced, I'm Neema Lugangira, Member of Parliament from Tanzania, and also Chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. I would like to extend, again, our sincere gratitude to Interledger for including parliamentarians on this conversation. I think we can all agree that when we're talking about open payment systems, we cannot escape the issue of regulation, because we have to make sure that payments are done in such a way that it is safe for the users, for the consumers, but at the same time, from a government perspective, we have to make sure that this new evolution of digital financial services does not pave way for illicit financial flows. And in order to get that balance, that is where parliamentarians come in. Because as parliamentarians, we have the responsibility of ensuring that we have the right legislation in place, the right regulations in place to create that enabling environment for open payment systems to thrive, for governments to be able to adopt, for consumers to be able to adopt, but also for citizens to be able to understand and trust these systems. Now, when discussions are happening and development is happening in exclusion of parliamentarians, then us on our side, we will create regulation and legislation out of the fear of the unknown. But if we are involved in the process, then we can also perhaps provide some of these worries that the people have, the people that we represent, their anxieties, and these can then inform you guys as tech, as developers, on how to make the systems and the solutions safe and more adaptable for everyone. So I think our role is critical. I would like to say we're the missing link to this jigsaw puzzle. So let us continue to be engaged, but then again, when you speak to us, please use the most layman language possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And the same question to you, Honorable
Thank
Passaris.
you. I stand with my honorable members here to thank Interledger for involving parliamentarians in this dialogue. What I want to say is, as representatives of the people, right, as parliamentarians, I want to talk about the legislation that we have in Kenya. The legislation says that we have to have something called civic education. And the legislation also says that we have to have something called public participation. So one of the key elements for success is to ensure that the people that we represent, which is the masses, who are going to be the consumers of this product, have to have a buy-in. So in Kenya right now, no legislation will succeed if you haven't involved the public. And the way to involve them is by a civic education. And also, once you want to pass the legislation, whatever legislation you want to pass, you have to have the public participate in that legislation because it's going to impact and affect them. So our new constitution actually ushered in this progressive way of involving the citizens. So I think that's an important point that you need to know, that as Africa evolves, most of the countries are actually going towards that path of proper, serious representation. And when we talk about regulations, legislation, you can't avoid the fact that you have three arms of government. I believe that it's important that when you're engaging parliamentarians, you also engage the judiciary, you also engage the executive. Why? Because this is something that if you engage parliamentarians and we get it right, it could be stopped at the judicial level. If you engage the executive and they get it wrong, it could come back to Parliament. So rather than have something stagnate and not move forward, you're better placed if you involved all three arms of government to make sure that everybody has a buy-in. So what are the reasons why you want to involve legislators? Because one, this is a product that's going to be used by consumers, so you need to protect them. For the financial stability of a country, I mean, I dare not think what would happen if Safaricom, who handles the M-Pesa money transaction, which is used by almost 10 to 20 million Kenyans, would collapse tomorrow. What would that mean to the country? And then you also have to have enhanced transparency. I mean, I always question, we borrow money, we transact with M-Pesa, but there is I can't tell what have I actually spent on this? It's almost like, you're not realizing the expense that you have had. So I think there has to be absolute transparency so one can know exactly how much it's costing them to transact through the money platform. There's this notion that it's cheaper than banks. Is it? How do we prove that if we don't have monthly statements to tell us how? You're doing maybe 100 transactions in a month, and you're borrowing and paying and borrowing and paying, and you don't know really how much have I really spent. So efficiency is important, and I think that's what mobile payment schemes have actually come up with. Is efficient to do that. You can, from the comfort of your palm, from your residence, you can pay your electricity bill, you can send your mother in the village some money, and you don't have to travel like you used to in the past. So it's obviously a good thing to have, but I think there's also the area of fraud. A lot of people are being defrauded, and there's no way to get the justice. So how do you link the judiciary and the executive so that the police are involved, so that you have a desk that actually handles this? Because it's a new thing, but many people have burned their fingers. But all in all, it's progressive, but we need to make sure that we have a complete buy-in from the people, through their legislators, judiciary, so that there's justice, and the executive, so that whenever they frame the regulations, because we pass the laws, they frame the regulations, we are able to make sure that this product is actually not going to be a pain point. And it has been a pain point for quite a few people, but it's been a blessing to many more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask you the following question as well, Honorable Passaris, which is around M-Pesa, because Kenya, of course, is known for M-Pesa, which has really revolutionized mobile money on the continent. So building on that strong foundation, how does Kenya envision the future of addressing the challenges of digital financial exclusion? What lessons can other countries in Africa learn from Kenya's experience with M-Pesa?
M-Pesa is brilliant. I mean, we're proud as Kenyans that we were the first country to actually come up with a money platform, a payment platform. But the fact that it's a monopoly, right? Other players have tried to break into that market, and they've not really succeeded. Banks have come in and are also having their own apps to transact. And recently, a member of parliament actually came into the floor of the House, and he questioned, should Safaricom running its M-Pesa platform be regulated by central bank? So there was that question, and I think the motion was actually passed. So we're going to wait and see where that goes. And I think it's the big banks that are like, okay, we're losing a lot of market share here because everybody's trading on Safaricom's platform of M-Pesa. I think that my advice to every country is that, to allow for small players, indigenous, as well as to guard on monopoly, because when you have a monopoly in such a big platform, then the consumer is not guarded. So that's my biggest worry when it comes to M-Pesa, Safaricom, because of its dominance in the market. And I feel that Kenya on its own, now we're East Africa community, we've got a population of over 120 million people. How do you make sure that this platform works in the region? And I believe that what SADC is doing is a way, the Pay Sharp is a way for us to emulate and see how can we also improve it. But all in all, it's positive, but it could end up negative in the fact that it's a monopoly. It's one company that controls the entire, almost 95% of the market share.
Thank you very much. The next question I will put to you, Honorable Lugangira, because Tanzania has also been a leader in addressing digital financial exclusion through mobile money and through interoperability. So I'm curious what you think the future looks like in Tanzania for addressing the challenges of digital financial exclusion. Perhaps you could also speak to Tanzania's experience adopting a levy on transactions and whether increasing the cost of transactions was a good policy choice or an ineffective policy choice, and what lessons you have for other countries both in East Africa and across the continent more broadly.
Thank you for that. Definitely, I think in Tanzania we have about, I'll just share some quick statistics, and this is from our regulator, TCRA, that in 2023, we had about 55.8 million mobile money accounts. And compared to 2019, that was 25.8 million. So you can immediately see that in a space of between 2019 to 2023, there was a sharp growth of 116.2%. That shows the increase in the number of people who have been using mobile money. And in terms of even the transactions, just for taking an example from M-Pesa, in March 2020, they had about 106 million transactions worth $3.9 billion US dollars. But surprisingly, when you come to the number of Tanzanians who have accounts in the financial institutions, you'll find, for example, only 30% of rural women have an account with financial institutions. So you can already picture the way mobile money has revolutionized the issue of access to financial services. But when we're talking about mobile money services or digital financial services, cost becomes a critical factor. And it's good that you've pointed that out, because when the cost of transaction increases, then there's a decline in the interests of using, and actually there's backlash. I remember that in Tanzania, and I have my colleague here who's a fellow member of parliament in Tanzania, when we in parliament increased the cost of transaction on the mobile services, it was chaos, because and even it immediately showed, the statistics showed a drop because people opted not to transact, and that proves that the cost of transaction can be it can have a huge domino effect. And of course, as representatives of the people, we listen to our citizens, and we reversed that decision, and immediately you could see the rise again. And this is why it's important to engage and include and capacitate parliamentarians, because every country, obviously, you want to find different means of increasing your government revenue. At the same time, you have to ensure, even if it's a digital sector, similarly to the way other sectors are being taxed and people are liable to taxes, so should the digital sector. But here the big puzzle is, how should it be taxed in such a way that it doesn't become detrimental? And again, so I think one of the things that the open payments is bringing is the ability for users to transfer funds quickly and less expensive. So that competition and giving that flexibility to the user to going with the best option. And to me, and I believe also my colleagues here as parliamentarians, that's an important takeaway, to try and see, okay, we have the financial institutions, we have mobile money, but then how do we link it and take it a step further into open payment systems? But whilst we're doing all of that, how do we make it safe? Because already, let me tell you, with mobile money, I think each one of us as parliamentarians, we have been frauded on mobile money. And if we can be frauded, can you imagine our citizens at village level? Because it is done in such a sophisticated way, and before you know it, you've sent money to someone, and then you realize that it was a fraud. Now, such incidences make people, the impact that we're creating to get that progress, getting the buy-in and the interest and the growth of the financial inclusion, it takes a step back. Then there is mistrust, there is fear. So imagine if something like mobile money is creating also chaos on that side, as good as it is, but there is a flip side of it, the negatives. Now imagine trying to introduce open payment systems. So we really need to find ways to ensure that it is safe, and that can improve also and reduce those vulnerabilities in the system. Yeah, so that's where we are, but I see huge potential, especially for us as Africans, and in the way in which it can create a quick solution of making sure rural women, rural smallholder farmers can have access to their payments faster and cheaper without using middle persons. But I guess that's why we're here, to learn and to see how best can we do that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here and engaging. Now, Senator Neema, I'd love if you could speak to us a bit about how Kenya's regulatory environment either supports, enables, hinders the adoption of open, interoperable payment protocols, what this looks like, and also just if you could perhaps touch upon the point that the Honorable Lugangira just raised around safety and security, because as you also mentioned in your opening remarks, as parliamentarians, that is a responsibility you take very seriously to keep citizens safe. So how do we find the right balance there? How do we enable open, thriving, enabling environment for innovation while safeguarding consumers?
Thank you very much. First, to just emphasize or re-emphasize that the mobile money innovation has been the financial inclusive tool that was innovated, at least for those of us in Africa. You find that use of mobile money services is a service that is accessible to the illiterate, to those in the rural areas. Therefore, I think it is one of the greatest innovations that have come. And we also acknowledge that regardless of what sector you're in, whether it is finance, whether you're talking about paying for services in the health sector, we are all, or the world is moving to a level where a lot of the services are being digitized, and therefore, and the payments are also going to happen digitally. So it's a good thing to try and harness all members of populations, whether rural or urban, to join in and be able to participate and use these services, because banks have actually been a middle-class urban area tool that has excluded many in the past. Now, as these mobile and other tech tools come up, you find that they are running ahead of regulation. And oftentimes, the financial sector will be regulated by the central banks, will be regulated, the mobile money funds will be regulated also by the communications authorities. In Kenya, we have the Communications Authority of Kenya, which would be regulating the service providers. We also have the Treasury, that is the ministry that guides on regulations relating to financial matters. And of course, then you have Parliament. Parliament makes the laws. You'll have the Public Finance Management Act that will be guiding matters finance, but it then empowers the Minister for Finance to make regulations on the detail of what ought to be done. In Kenya, we have oftentimes the regulation will be made around how the Ministry of the Treasury is interested in getting revenues, maybe from the service providers and so on. And recently you may have heard, we had a crisis of the Gen Zs actually protesting against the finance bill that Kenya had. One of the, or some of the provisions in that finance bill was targeting the revenue collection from mobile money transactions, which have not often been covered in their entirety, and people felt that that was targeting very poor people under harsh economic times, and we had some kind of, actually the president had to retract on that finance bill, but I can see, I think from last week, we are going back to ensuring that all mobile providers and open payments are going to be captured for purposes of ensuring revenue. So in Kenya, we do the broad, as Parliament, we do the broad Finance Act, we will do the broad communications legislation, but we will leave the detail of regulation to the regulatory bodies which are established by Parliament. Now, what we are learning as a result of the engaging around the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance is that a lot of products that come through technology and science and innovation are alien to parliaments, most of parliaments, particularly parliaments in Africa, and our legislative steps are way behind comparable to other countries. And that's why we are finding it important that as we move forward, we need the tech and science experts to actually work hand in hand with legislators, not just in Africa, but across the world, in order for us to be able to put in place that legislation that helps with these issues. So in Kenya, we have some level of regulation, regulatory authorities. We have some level of regulation, but we still have a lot to do in terms of open money payment, and it's an area where we are learning. For instance, this government, the current government, established what is called a hustler fund. They used the USSD to try and operate it, but we've had a lot of defaults on the loans that they gave on that fund, which means that they did not check every aspect of how to operate this product, and they are going back to the drawing board to ensure that they are able to provide safety nets to ensure that the government does not lose money that it is lending to people. I hope that helps to a certain extent. Yeah.
It does. Thanks so much. Honorable Passaris, your constituency is in Nairobi. Nairobi has a significant number of informal workers in the population. At the moment, do you believe that digital financial services that are offered in Kenya are meeting the needs of this population?
Okay, so Nairobi being a capital city, a lot of people we have something called devolution in Kenya, which was ushered in with the 2010 constitution, which meant we wanted to make sure we have devolved governments, like the states, different counties. So we've got 47 counties. But unfortunately, people are still looking for greener pastures, and they come to the capital city. Now, when you come to the capital city, if you can't get a job, then you can't make ends meet, then you get on this mobile platform and they allow you to borrow. Or you get onto the Hustler Fund and it allows you to borrow. So what is happening with this payment scheme is that, mobile payment schemes is that people are now getting heavily borrowed. And with heavily borrowed comes the stress of how do I pay it. Then comes the blocking of your line. Then comes, you put data, and then your data is taken to pay your debt. So basically, we are actually not helping mental health. Because when you make money really accessible to people in the city because they're trying to survive, it's like what happens in the US with credit card debt. You take one credit card, the next credit card, the next credit card. Before you know it, you're overwhelmed. And already now we have the student loans, etc. So there has to be a lot of education on what it means to borrow, on paying, and we have to make sure that you vet people and you don't just make it available, because what's happening is people are getting hooked into, oh, today I can get $5, tomorrow I can get $10. Before you know it, you're owing $1,000 and you have no idea how you're going to run your own family. So there is that danger, right? So we need a lot of consumer education. We need data protection as well. Because if we don't have data protection, then of course we're letting people be vulnerable. People's identities are being stolen. So we also need to make sure we have a system of identity that cannot be defrauded. So you can find somebody can actually go in and get your money with a fake ID. So if we don't have a good system of identification, then of course that again will lead to defrauding of a lot of citizens. I believe that when I look at Kenya and Safaricom and M-Pesa, they've done very well in terms of job creation. They've created jobs across the city, and we've got people starting businesses. As you know, just with their phone, you can start a business of transaction and make some good money. But they have failed to make sure that they have in every unit an anti-fraud department. So people who are defrauded, really, we have a police force that's probably not well trained to deal with fraud. So in the city where you're coming to look for greener pastures, you end up highly in debt, and then you also end up with losing everything that you came to the city with because somebody takes advantage of your identity, takes your, Safaricom has this, don't share your PIN with somebody. But sometimes you can actually not share your PIN, you find your phone has been hacked and somebody's got your PIN and they steal everything from you. So we need to make an investment on education. We need to make an investment on how to deal with the fraud and to be ahead of the fraudster. I think the fraudster is ahead of the provider, and that's really sad for a lot of citizens.
Just allow me to add that Kenya has the Data Protection Act, which was passed in 2019, but it only has the basics in the sense that being a rights-based constitution that we have, it was intended to be the flip side of facilitating access to information and largely how to deal with information by government institutions. I don't think at the time we passed that law, we had the sophistication or we thought through what it would mean to do data protection in the world of mobile money. So it's one of the things that, and we hope one of the conversations we had yesterday was to try and find out, and had I asked a question in the earlier panel, I was going to ask, how does good regulation look like? For those of you in this field, what experience do you have, Singapore, UK, wherever, what can we say are the minimum provisions that would be in a data protection law? What would be the good minimums that would be in regulation and in law that we can consider even putting in a model law as a caucus, so that we can then guide, as parliamentarians, we can guide our countries on how best to legislate on this issue.
I was just going to say that if Safaricom or M-Pesa or Hustler Fund were to go for all the defaulters, half of Kenya would be in jail. So it's a danger zone. It's a danger zone. So they better get it right in terms of not giving somebody who cannot afford, by his income standard, the money. So you're creating a bigger problem where people are living beyond their means, and you can get one line for your brother, one line for your sister, even if they, so the system itself allows for a population to be aggrieved and to be put in a very bad place. And in this era of mental health, that's something that we should really check, because almost everyone is defaulting.
Thanks. I'm going to bring the Honorable Lugangira back into the conversation, and I'd love to hear what you think about how we can remove or reduce the gender divide in access to digital financial services, because even through the use of mobile money in many countries, but throughout Africa and in other regions of the world, there remains fewer women who have access to digital financial services. Do you have any thoughts on how we can address that?
Thank you. I think, first of all, even when we look at the mobile money services that has revolutionized, the financial services in Africa, we can already know one of the ways in which that was achieved was through education and awareness campaigns. And similarly, when we're talking about the inclusion of women in digital financial services, is we need to provide the capacity building. We need to be able to have funding structures and grants and technical support for organizations that want to raise awareness at community level, because that's where the majority of the women are in the rural areas, about capacity building in terms of how to access those services, but how also to protect themselves. Because you find that they voluntarily give their passwords in ignorance. So when there is fraud, even when you want to take legal action or to support them in taking legal action, it goes back to, but you gave your password yourself voluntarily. So I think capacity building is a critical component. But we already see, and I imagine even with open payments, that it significantly increases accessibility. For example, in Tanzania, 80% of the population are accessing mobile money, whereas it's around 30% who actually have an account in a financial institution. So you can see how digital financial services are bridging that gap of access to financial services, and that will even be more so for women. So I think it's very important to have capacity building, but also provide or come up with services that are responsive to the needs of the particular group, in particular women. But I also wanted to touch on the things that my colleagues just spoke about. When we're talking about open payments or digital financial services, I think one of the key advantages is also the role that it plays in improving transactions, cross-border transactions. In Africa, we have the regional blocks, economic regional blocks, plus we have the Africa Free Trade, and all of these bring opportunities for business, new business areas, accessing new markets. But then, how do you get the payments? So I think the digital financial services open payments brings about that opportunity. But one of the things that also we must recognize, I know a lot of people don't want to hear taxes, but when we're talking about digital financial services, there is a company which is making money from offering those digital financial services, and they need to somehow be taxed. Now the challenge is, you'd find that maybe one would be registered, I'll pick a country, maybe they're registered in Mars. I'm not going to pick any particular countries. I'll say Mars, right? So one is registered in Mars. This company providing digital services or open payments is registered in Mars. But they're operating in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. And they're transacting. Obviously, they're earning income. But because they're registered in Mars, they're liable to pay their taxes in Mars. But even in international taxation, there is something about the origin of the origin of sale, country of origin of sale, or country of origin of revenue. Now, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya are not getting any percentage out of that corporate tax. So I think that's another conversation, especially when we're coming to deal with governments on the issue of taxation and the digital service tax. How does it play into this matter of digital financial services and open payments? That can be another conversation for another day, but it's something that we also have to think about, especially when we're trying to get the buy-in from the respective authorities.
Allow me to say something on gender. Now, the disparity in gender is because the tech gadgets are actually masculinized in Africa. So there are tools of power, and tools of power in Africa go to the man first. So you'll find that even the mobile phone in the village, the first mobile phone in the house is bought by the man. Even if it is bought by the children, for him, it is him who has it first. And you will find in many marketplaces, you'll have one mobile gadget that is being used by 15 or 20 women. So if you want to send money, in fact, we actually have people who make money out of facilitating their mobile phones as the tools for receiving money for women in a market and so on. So it is still the case that education resources, which include now the tech gadgets, are less accessible to women than they are to men. So, and I'm raising this so that when the likes of Interledger get into a partnership with a university, please make it a deliberate point to find out how many women are being included in that project. How many of the innovators are women? And this is a case not just for Africa, but globally you will find that a lot of computer science labs have less than 10% women. So we need to, again, deliberately ensure that we do what it takes to bring on board women as part of this sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mumad. Would you also like to comment on that?
Yeah, you know, I was, when I saw the question being framed and looking at the LGBTQ population, I just thought to myself, with Africa not recognizing and still criminalizing the LGBTQ, the biggest problem we have is I started thinking, you know, it's not all the transactions happen on the platform, all right? Sometimes somebody sends you money and you want to go to an agent to collect the cash. Now, can you imagine if when you took your identity, you identified as a man, and then now you're 30 years old and you identify as a woman, and then the country does not recognize that transgender. So, so you want to go and get the cash, but when you get to the retailer, right, or the agent, you're not able. Your ID and how you look are not matching. So you will not be able to get that cash unless you part with some bribe, or you could be arrested because somebody thinks, oh, he's committing a fraud. He's coming in to get the money that's not his. So I think that poses a big challenge when you go into platform transactions. If you're transacting on your platform, you won't get into that danger. But if you need to access the cash, right, because it's not always going to be online, sometimes you just need to go and get the cash because you need to pay something in cash. So I feel that the fact that in Africa we're still not accepting LGBTQ rights, a lot of them will actually not be well served with the money platforms when it comes to cash withdrawals at agents.
Thank you. We are almost out of time. We have 2 minutes left before this session ends. So perhaps to close, I will ask the three of you the same question, which is, do you have a message or any ask for us in the Interledger community? Anything that we should be taking forward, or anything that in particular you would like us to consult with you on as we think through how to develop new financial systems and services? And
okay, I'll go first. I think one thing that I can say is, obviously when we're operating in any country, we have to ensure that we educate ourselves on the regulatory and legislative framework of that particular country, and we have to adhere to the regulatory framework and legislation of the country. And regulations may be different from one country to another. That is why it is important to become aware of the particular country. But a key takeaway as the African Parliamentarian Network on Internet Governance, I'm hoping and I believe that this is a start of a great relationship. And one of the key things that we will immediately hopefully work together on is having an analysis of the legislative landscape to try and see where the gaps, what can be done in the regulatory and legislative framework to pave way or create an enabling environment for open payment systems whilst protecting users, countries, etc. And hopefully through that come up with a toolkit for parliamentarians on how to address, open payment systems. Thank you.
thank you. Senator Muma?
Thank you very much. First, to acknowledge that I think the mobile and open money system is a tool that is required in the world. For decades, money services has been a tool for the rich, banks and so on, that has not been accessed by many. With the mobile and digital money platforms, there is opportunity for everyone to be included, including those that have never and might never have a bank account. Secondly, we have not had many philanthropic or a lot of philanthropy on matters money and the financial sector. So I wish to congratulate Interledger for the kind of work you're doing to invest in the financial markets for facilitating inclusion by everyone, because everyone on earth deals with money. But we have elected to actually just let those at the tip of the pyramid to be the ones who are regulated and all of that. So I think what you're doing, and I hope many other philanthropic institutions can do the same, what you're doing is commendable, and we encourage you to continue doing that and to keep thinking through other innovative tools that can see inclusion of very vulnerable people in this entire system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Honorable Passaris.
All right, let me make it quick. I mean, there's no going backwards. We can only go forward. So advocacy and awareness, research and data collection, capacity building, collaboration with stakeholders, monitoring and evaluation. We are at a good space as a globe, and we can use this platform to make sure that the 40% that is untapped gets tapped, and gets tapped in a manner that will enhance their lives and bring prosperity to the continent of Africa and the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And please join me in thanking our esteemed parliamentarians for joining us today.